Hello, I will give a message in English and Spanish consecutively. How to access Spanish interpretation. Buenas, voy a hacer un anuncio en inglés y español de forma consecutiva de cómo accesar la interpretación al español. En la parte de abajo de la pantalla de Zoom va a aparecer un icono de un globo. La interpretación no está activada ahora mismo, pero pronto se va a activar y cuando se active van a recibir un mensaje de que la interpretación está activada y va a haber un globo en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Pueden hacer clic y en ese menú escoger el lenguaje en el que desean escuchar el webinario de hoy. Las opciones van a ser español, inglés y apagado. Si desean escuchar el webinario en español, pueden escoger español y así van a escuchar la interpretación simultánea de las ponentes en español. At the bottom of the screen, there will be a globe icon that pops up very soon. It's not yet activated. When you may pick there the language interpretation that you wish to engage in this webinar in. The options will be Spanish, English, or off. You may select that option and be able to hear simultaneous interpretation in that language when the other language is being spoken. Si tienen alguna pregunta con la interpretación, pueden dejarnos saber por el chat. If you have any questions once the interpretation is turned on, you can let us know via the chat. We want to remind everybody to please speak at a moderate pace for both interpretation and captions. To leave space, a short space between speakers or from the moment a question is asked to the response so that it doesn't get together in the writing of the caption or the interpretation in Spanish. And that you please give clearly any number, numerical, or acronym that you please spell it out the first time that you use it. Thank you so much, and the interpretation will be turned on right now.
Welcome to the technical workshop for Firelight Media's Spark Fund. I'm Michelle Boston, project manager for the Spark Fund. We're encouraged and happy to have you join us today to learn more about this NEH-sponsored initiative and opportunity for Firelight to support mid-career BIPOC documentary directors whose humanities-themed projects were disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's webinar, you'll learn more about the Spark Fund, its goals, the application process, and we'll answer your questions after the overview and presentation. Today's webinar has live closed captions. You can look at the bottom of your screen to access that feature. And as you've just heard, we are also having live Spanish translations. After this webinar, a PDF will be made of the slide presentation and sent to everyone who registered. This recording will also be available on Firelight's YouTube channel. So before we begin, let us have a land acknowledgement and to take a moment to acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we are currently gathered. We recognize the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their homes today. We acknowledge that the Native Americans were here before us, are here with us now, and will continue to be with us as we look forward to the future. I am in Washington, D.C., and for my region, I recognize the Native communities who lived and still live among the three rivers we now call Potomac, Anacostia, and Chesapeake. They are the Nacotchtank, the Dode-Toxinant, Pamunkey, and Piscataway. If you know the names of the ancestral Native communities where you are now, please take this moment to acknowledge them in the chat. Thank you. At this time, let us begin our slide presentation. And we will go to our agenda for today. This is our agenda. We've had our welcome and land acknowledgement. And now I want to take a moment to thank our co-presenters for today's webinar. On the next slide, before our opening remarks by Marcia Smith. We are very, very pleased to have these organizations join us today to co-present today's webinar about the Spark Fund. They include Black Public Media, Brown Girls Doc Mafia, the Center for Asian American Media, ADOC PR, the International Documentary Association, Latino Public Broadcasting, the National Hispanic Foundation for the Arts, Pacific Islanders in Communications, Third Horizon, and Vision Maker Media. Thank you all. In this presentation, there will be a slide with URLs where you can contact them individually and check out some of the opportunities with their organizations. And that will be part of the PDF you received after the webinar. So thank you, co-presenters. Next slide. I now will turn over the mic or the screen to Marcia Smith, President of Firelight Media.
Thank you, Michonne. You can please take down that slide of me. I don't want to see it, my name there. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm glad so many of us could make it. A special thank you to all our partners for this event. We could not do it without you, and we're grateful for your presence in the field, your partnership on many things, including today. You're going to hear a lot in the next few minutes about what the Spark Fund is, how it works, how the application works. We're going to try to answer all your questions about that whole process. I really just want to say a couple of words about why the Spark Fund is important to us. And it's for two reasons. One is we have seen, Firelight has seen from its own work, the challenges that mid-career BIPOC documentary makers have in the field in being able to sustain their work, get more support for their work, even when they have proven that they produce excellent work. So we understand that there are systemic obstacles to being able to build and sustain a career in this field at large. We consider the experience of BIPOC documentary makers to be especially challenging, and in many ways, the miner's canary on issues that affect the entire field. So we're very happy to be able to direct some support, limited though it is, to that particular group of people, that is mid-career BIPOC makers who have proven their commitment to the field and have already established a track record of excellent work. And the second reason we are especially happy and proud to be able to do this initiative is because we think it's important to send a message to the field at large about the way filmmakers are supported. That is, I am certain everyone on this call knows that the way filmmakers survive is to piece together project support, piece together funding from disparate sources with gigging on other people's films, part-time work, sometimes full-time work, to be able to sustain their commitment and keep doing their work. This is a stipend, as you'll hear more about from Michonne and the team, which we think is an important statement about how we think BIPOC, all documentary filmmakers should be supported. That is, every dime should not have to be directed into the project, and all funding that goes to filmmakers should not have to be pegged to a particular project, a particular outcome. So that is the second reason we're very happy to be able to offer this initiative. We think it's an important message to the field that we hope will reverberate during and after the Spark Fund funds are spent. So I will turn it back over to Michonne, and again, thank you to all of you here to participate, and thank you again to our partners for partnering. Michonne.
Thank you, Marcia. So we're going into our overview about the Spark Fund. So let's bring up the first slide, which is about Firelight Media. For those of you who are not familiar with Firelight Media, this is who we are. Firelight Media is the premier destination for nonfiction cinema by and about communities of color. Firelight was co-founded by filmmakers Stanley Nelson and Marcia Smith, who you just met. Firelight Media produces documentary films, supports filmmakers of color, and cultivates audiences for their work. And you can visit and learn more on the website at the URL there on the slide. About the Spark Fund. The Spark Fund, as Marcia described, offers support to establish independent documentary filmmakers who self-identify as Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color, otherwise known as BIPOC, and whose work on humanities-themed projects was disrupted by the COVID-19 public health emergency. The Spark Fund is awarding 36 stipends of $50,000 each over the period of 1 year. The Spark Fund is underwritten by the National Endowment for the Humanities, sustaining the humanities through the American Rescue Plan, which they call SHARP, with the hashtag SHARP, its grant-making initiative. Next slide. So we are going into the timeline for the Spark Fund. And the next slide will have that. So the Spark Fund opened on November 1st. The application was opened and it will close at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, December 29th, 2021. On this page, we have the URL for the landing page and the submittable application page as well. We also have a Spanish language application, which has a separate link, which means applications will be accepted in Spanish language. You are now attending the December 6th Technical Assistant Workshop webinar. We had one in November, and this is the final one, but the recording will be made available for reference. There will be a staff review for eligibility after the application closes from December 30th to mid-January 2022, meaning we just want to make sure your application was filled out correctly. It will not be evaluated by staff for content. A selection committee will review the applications. There will be one review process to select finalists, and then the final review in late February. Notifications of status of the applications will be made in March 2022, and the grant period begins April 1st, 2022. Next slide. So let's talk about eligibility. Who can apply? Documentary directors or director producers. You could be a director editor, but the key word here is you must be a director on the project. Also, directors who self-identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, as I mentioned before. To be eligible, you must be a US citizen or have resided in the United States for a minimum of 3 years prior to December 29th, 2021. This is an NEH requirement. You must have directed at least one of the following: one documentary feature that's more than 40 minutes, 2 or more broadcast cable documentary episodes over 30 minutes in length, and or 3 or more short films, 40 minutes and under. And the film must have exhibited in an Academy Award qualifying festival, received theatrical distribution, broadcast, or streaming video on demand distribution. Next slide. Also, eligibility means you are actively working on a documentary project, whether it's a short, mid-length, or feature with a social humanities theme. The Spark Fund is particularly interested in supporting filmmakers whose projects are aligned with the NEH's A More Perfect Union initiative. We have a link to that. This is an initiative that's tied into the 250th anniversary of the United States coming up. It's very broad in theme and scope. Please check it out. Also, eligibility is about enduring financial hardship due to the pandemic. So the application is arranged in narrative form, and this is where you would share that information. And that is why the Spark Fund is not a project grant. We want to emphasize that. You don't have to submit a budget. Next slide. So here's more information about A More Perfect Union, America at 250. The initiative is to explore, reflect on, and tell the stories of the quest for a more just, inclusive, and sustainable society throughout US history. It seeks to bring the perspective of the humanities to questions of racial justice, gender equality, the evolution of the United States landscape, and the nation's role in the world. It seeks to strengthen public knowledge of the principles of democracy, constitutional governance, equity, and human rights, and or highlight the experiences of Indigenous people and nations, as well as other communities severely underrepresented in the media landscape, including those in US territories, as well as the history of relationships among historically disenfranchised or marginalized communities. This is all available on the NEH.gov website. Next slide. Okay, who is ineligible? Applicants enrolled in a degree granting program. If you are a student of film, you are a current student of film, you cannot apply for the Spark Fund. Persons under the age of 18 are ineligible. Persons who are retired or on Social Security disability with no work attachment are ineligible. Also, K through 12 teachers and administrators, and Firelight Media officers, employees, or members of the board of directors. I am not eligible. Next slide, please. Also, applicants cannot be actively supported by a grant from the NEH or other American Rescue Plan or SHARP projects. 2 of those projects that are documentary focused just closed their applications on December 1st. They are from the Sundance Institute and the Independent Television Service, or ITVS. Those 2 organizations also receive funds like Firelight for their American Rescue Plan projects. If you have applied to those programs, you can only accept one if you, let's say, hit the jackpot and receive 2 or more awards. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to look at the selection criteria. Next slide. So our evaluators will be reviewing applications according to the following criteria. They want to see that the applicant is a mid-career filmmaker with a demonstrated commitment to documentary filmmaking. They're looking at the evidence of disruption of work or the story of the disruption of work and livelihood to the filmmaker caused by the pandemic. Also, what is being considered for the criteria is relevance and importance of humanities themes and thoughtfulness with respect to integrating humanities scholars and or scholarship into the project. And they will also be reviewing the filmmaker's statement, conveying overall filmmaking mission, creative approach, and intended impact for the finished project. So a reminder, the Spark Fund is not a project grant. Next slide, please. So this is a question that comes up in our conversations with potential applicants. What are the humanities? Or is my film a humanities film? So let's review that for a moment. These are the subjects that the National Endowment for the Humanities identify as humanities topics. They do have subcategories as well. We may say gender studies, we may say inequity studies, urban studies, things like that. They fall within the topic of the humanities. Let's use some examples. If there is let's say, for example, a documentary about Paul Robeson, it may come under labor studies, it may come under history, it may be music history, it may be African American studies. So that's all within the scope of humanities. You may be studying economic inequities. So economics, that's humanities as well. You may be doing comparative religion or looking at some kind of religious context in your film. That would come under humanities. We are here to help you with those questions about what are humanities if you are feeling the need for some guidance around it. But this is a checkbox that will be on the application in which you can check all that apply for the project that you will be submitting under, even though this is not a project grant. But we want to know what project was disrupted at what phase of the COVID-19 pandemic for the Spark Fund. So that's a brief overview of the humanities, and during the Q&A, if you have other questions related to that, I'm here to answer them. Next slide. And that's where we are now. We're at the questions. So Antonia Thornton, our project coordinator for the Spark Fund, is going to read the questions from the Q&A queue. Please submit questions to the Q&A queue on this webinar space, and we will pick them up from there and answer them. Thank you very much. So Antonia, do we have questions?
Yes, our first question is, will we be able to see a copy of this presentation after the webinar?
Yes, a copy of this presentation will be available on Firelight Media's YouTube channel, and the PDF will be sent to all persons who registered for today's webinar.
Our next question is, where does queer and African American studies fit in those boxes?
It depends on other categories as well. I mean, there is, in those boxes, there are cultural studies that may come under anthropology. There are cultural studies that may come under economics, history. So from there, where does that expand? Where, if you're studying a community, how does it expand into some of those other topics or themes in your documentary? So you have to ask yourself the question, here I'm focusing on a community. Where does it fit in terms of, am I looking at history? Am I looking at economics? Am I looking at gender studies? So there are the subcategories under those very broad categories that NEH has established. So look at your project and determine what other boxes can be checked.
Next up, we have, is it true that we do not have to submit a work sample for the project we're working on?
It's true. If you would like to include a link to your project or a link to a website in your narrative, you can do that. If you believe that will help the reviewer better understand who you are and your vision for your film and filmmaking, you have space to include links in the narratives fields of the application.
The following question is, do you recommend a lookbook?
A lookbook. I've heard that for actors. Is it if I have a follow-up question for that. Is that a link? Do you have a link? If there's a link, if you want to include that and you feel that that's best represents your project and yourself as a filmmaker, then there are spaces, as I said, in the narrative parts of the application where you can include links. But let me just remind everyone, it does have a limited field. It's a limited field for a number of words, so choose carefully. Any other questions?
Yep. Next, we have, for projects that have co-directors, how should applicants submit their application?
That's a first. Wow, co-direct. So you're both, that's another question where I have to ask another question. Are you both submitting an application for the same project or both submitting separate projects? The Spark Fund is designed for individuals to apply because again, these are like relief funds. This is a stipend, it's not a grant. So my suggestion is you have to apply separately, but that's the first time I've heard of an applicant or co-applicants or two applicants applying for under one project. So that's the best answer I have for now.
Our next question is, when will you announce who was selected to receive the funding?
April 2022. I mean, there's a public announcement, and then there's the announcement that people receive that you've received funding, and then the process that's part of. So in March 2022, there will be not an announcement, but there will be letters will go out on the status of the application, and then the next steps afterwards. And then there will be another announcement, more public, in April 2022.
Next, we have, which is the most weighted in criterion in the review, or are they all equally weighted?
At this point, they are all equally weighted in the sense that for the evaluation, or the evaluators will have something where they will pretty much have the same, how can I say, scoring for each category. Again, let me emphasize, this is the first time that we or any organization has had such a grant, or it's not even a grant, such an initiative that is providing more support funds to filmmakers to help them get back on track from a public emergency. So some of these outcomes will be determined by who has applied, the application pool, as well as what the evaluators are seeing. So all the criteria we listed before at this point is being considered equally.
Our next question is, what if this is your first documentary?
If you look at the eligibility requirements, you have to have produced, or should I say, you have to have directed at least one feature-length documentary, 2 episodes for a documentary series, or 3 or more documentary shorts. So, and those have to have been distributed in an Academy qualifying festival, or broadcast, or theatrical, or streaming video on demand. So if you look at the eligibility requirements, if you do not have at least one of those eligibility requirements, or do not meet one of those, then you would not be eligible for this grant, or for the Spark Fund.
Our next question is, are you able to tell us how many applications you've received already?
No, not at this time, because we don't like to, determine anything from how many applications we receive. At this point, it's still too early for us to really, for anyone to make any determinations from that.
Our next question is, do you need to speak specifically to how the pandemic interrupted your project or interrupted your work in general as a director?
Yes, as I said, most of the fields are narrative. So it's the opportunity to describe how the pandemic affected your work, or the work for the project, or kept the project from moving forward. And there's no one story to this, no one story. I mean, some people may have had to drop their projects because they had to take in relatives. Some people may have had to drop their projects because they had to relocate and live with relatives, because it was impossible to continue on or raise funding under those conditions. Some of you had to take other jobs and drop your film projects. So there's no one narrative or no one story about the impact of the pandemic on film projects. But there is for this application, we have to know what was that impact, and in your own words, how did that keep you from moving forward?
So our next question has 2 parts. If I'm not the director on the project, but have been a director on a doc project, can I apply? And then also, what if my body of work has been in both fiction and documentary?
If you are submitting an application, you have to be the director on that project. There is a field for the project that you put a paragraph on what the Humanities theme project was that was disrupted. So you must be the director on that project. I mean, you could direct all kinds of genre, but you also have to show and demonstrate that you have a documentary track record.
The next question is, are we allowed to use the funds for our project expenses or fees?
How you use the funds is totally up to you. There are no strings attached to the funds regarding how the filmmaker or the documentary director will use them.
The following question is, how many filmmakers are you going to select to receive the funding?
We will be selecting 36 directors to receive the funding.
Next up, we have, for this application question, goals. Describe your goals for the 12-month stipend award period. How will the funds help advance those goals? Is this specifically referring to the project goals, professional goals, or both?
I always believe in both and. They're the project goals, which are probably more immediate. And then how is that going to, once that project is sort of on its ramp, where does it go from there for the filmmaker? But as I said before, what I'm just offering is just probably a very broad guess, because it's all going to depend on the applicant pool and the evaluators who are going to be looking at the application.
The following question is, where is the list of Academy qualifying festivals? How can we prove that our films are shown in those festivals?
There is a link. I hope someone from our team can post that link. There is a website where you can look up all the film festivals and find out which are Academy qualifying festivals. And someone's going to search for that link. I think it's also available in the application as well.
The following question is, are you coordinating with Sundance and ITVS on when notifications for all your NEH Humanities fellowships are going out? For instance, if one were to be incredibly lucky and receive more than one fellowship, how long would awardees have to decide which one to accept?
We have coordinated our schedules in a way that awardees would not have to wait to decide on which initiative or which award they will accept. So yes, we are in contact with ITVS and Sundance to coordinate our schedules around that.
Next up is your SVOD requirement subscription-based only?
For the most part, it would probably be yes, but it is not required. However, I would say that subscription-based, based on the market we have, it probably makes a better case. I'm not saying the content there is better than non-subscription, but I'll put it this way, YouTube probably wouldn't count, or Vimeo, but it wouldn't have it as much weight as probably the others. But again, the evaluators will be looking at that, and those determinations will be put into place during evaluation.
Our next question is, do the works that were broadcast on cable TV abroad count?
I would say yes. But that's, again, these are really, really good questions, but that is, please put the information about where it was shown and about, you may have to add more information or a link for that. That's what I would suggest for the application, so that people will be more familiar with the distributor in case they are not, the evaluator is not.
Next up, we have, if you had poor training in narrative/writing skills, but are still eligible, will this hurt the application?
That's a good question. I would say find someone who can help you edit your application or read it and proofread it before you send it in, and that should help a lot.
Next up, we have, what if my project is a series and I'm just one of the directors on the series, but am one of the two main producers for the entire series?
Could you repeat that again, Antonia?
Yes, it's what if my project is a series and I'm just one of the directors on the series, but am one of the two main producers for the entire series?
Okay, so you want to submit the series. If you're submitting the series and you're the director on one, I mean, you've made your directing. The question is, do you have directing credits to meet the eligibility requirements for the Spark Fund? So if you meet those requirements based on your work or body of work, remember, this is for mid-career established filmmakers, then the rest is if you're submitting the project and you're the director, you have a directing role in that project, then that's the project you submit. There's also a field in the application for the rest of your crew or your team for the film as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Our following question is, if you worked on a lot of doc films as a cinematographer, including features and qualifying shorts, but this is your first feature doc as a director, does that still make you ineligible? I have made non-qualifying short docs as a director.
Again, the eligibility requirements require that you have a directing credit for eligible or documentaries that have been distributed on the distribution channels or platforms that are required in the application. So review the application and see where you land.
Next up, we have, if some of the 36 candidates decline an award because of getting one from another fund like Sundance, will a runner-up be selected?
Yes, we have a backup plan. So based on the evaluations, there will be, scoring as you probably all know, and then there are people who will probably, if someone does not accept the grant, then someone gets bumped up.
Our next question is, if I have also been an assistant director on some films, does that count?
You have to be a director on films. Again, let me emphasize, the Spark Fund is for mid-career directors, documentary directors of films.
Next up, we have, if you have more than one project that was disrupted, which consists of a short documentary and a historically based fiction feature, is it best to emphasize the short doc project? A lot of us move between documentary and fiction.
The Spark Fund is for documentary directors who self-identify as BIPOC. And so documentary projects with humanities themes are the only criteria for Spark Fund eligibility.
Is, can you talk about the eligibility of a filmmaker working on a project in development that has not received any funding yet and production has not started?
Well, the question is, here's another example of I have a question for a question. Was the project in development and was the research and development phase disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic? Just say, for example, you start the research and development for a documentary. Hasn't done any filmmaking at this point, but you're talking with humanities scholars, you're building your team, you have a script, you have some kind of outline, something ready to go, and then this hits, and you're like, oh, I've got, something happens, I have to drop this and pick up the pieces. So the Spark Fund is for different phases of a project, but that project should have been disrupted by the COVID pandemic, and that would be part of the narrative in the application that you would write. How was this project, whatever phase it was in, was disrupted by the pandemic. And the project should not be completed, by the way. That's another piece that you should know. It should be at some phase of a process, of the process of the film on its way to completion.
And we have a follow-up question for that one. Do series qualify as a project, or does it have to be a feature film?
Series qualify as a project.
And the next question is, are you required to spend all the funds in 1 year?
Wow, that sounds like somebody's about to invest something. We don't have any requirements around how the money, how the awardees will be using the money, but there will be some next steps after the awards are granted regarding, reporting. There are 2 reports that will be required, and those reports will just see where things are in that year. And at this point, I can't say what will be asked on those reports, but we do know that we will need some follow-up on the awardees and how the grant is assisting them in moving their project forward to the next level.
Our next question is, which section on the application do you put information about your past work? I see a field for the IMDb link, but I'm not seeing any field specifically asking about my past work. Should that just be included in the bio section?
Yes, in the bio section.
Next, we have, will the fellowship also come with other artist development opportunities through Firelight? Beyond the stipend, will there be cohort meetings, workshops, mentorships, etc.?
I love that question because, yes, we do want to plug you into the Firelight community. So this is, the Spark Fund is just one of those opportunities that's part of the Firelight community of programs to support BIPOC documentary filmmakers.
The following question is, if I had 2 doc projects in development, one feature with a stronger humanities component and one short, should I mention both or just focus on the feature?
That's up to you. There is the field to describe the project that you want to move forward and how the Spark Fund is going to help you do that. So you have to make that choice.
The following question is, when you award the filmmakers, will they get the money in a lump sum or portions of the grant over the year?
The grant will be awarded in 2 installments of $25,000.
So we've sort of gone over this next one, but I'll ask it anyway. Are you allowed to use funds to reimburse your money spent on a project already out of pocket on your own?
There are no restrictions on how you use the funds. The funds are intended to help filmmakers get on their feet, really get on their feet to get back to work on their film projects, on their humanities themed film projects.
And we have a follow-up on one of your previous answers. Can you elaborate on what it means to plug projects into the Firelight community? For example, will there be meetings for the cohort?
We're still bringing that together, that aspect together, but it is something that we Firelight would like to do because there's so many great programs that exist already with Firelight. And eventually, Spark Fund fellows will become alumni of Firelight. So once you go through a Firelight program, you're always a part of Firelight afterwards. But any kind of programming around the Spark Fund fellows is still yet to be determined, but definitely is on, is something that will happen.
Just a few questions left. This one is, what if your qualifying festival is only a qualifying festival for short films, but you are accepted as a documentary?
If your documentary is a short and it was in a qualifying short film festival, that's fine, as long as it's a qualifying festival.
And our final question, it may have gotten cut off, but I'm going to read it and see if we can make sense of it. The project can be outside, hello, 2 questions. The project can be outside US. In my case, is about African American history in Europe. If I don't find online the participation of my past documentary at a film festival which qualifies, how can I find it? My past documentary has been shown at the Pan-African Film Festival, but I can't find the information online.
I would say call the Pan-African Film Festival or email them and ask if they can send you the information or announcements, any announcements that they made about the film.
And the first question, I think, got jumbled in there, but it was basically about whether the project can have a topic that's outside of the US.
If you look at A More Perfect Union, or the, let's see, I'm trying to make sure I got that right. Yeah, A More Perfect Union. I think that's where you can start in terms of how your project connects to the themes that the NEH, who is sponsoring the Spark Fund, has determined to lift up for the 250th anniversary of the US. So I would say refer to that, and also, again, this is a new initiative. I can't really predict anything. None of us can, but we have to see what the evaluators will think. But I definitely would refer back to A More Perfect Union to get some clues and see where your project connects with those themes.
That was the final question we have this far.
Okay, thank you. So good questions, very good questions, and they help us see where the Spark Fund is, the touch points for the Spark Fund and who is going to be applying, but we encourage you apply. Go to the application and just apply and see where things land. So I just want to make some reminders at this point that the deadline for the Spark Fund is December 29th at 3 p.m. I think we need to go back to the slide. Show. And we offer this to our webinar attendees. You could sign up for 20-minute one-on-one consultations with me and Antonia on calendly.com, and that's the link there, and you can see the link in the chat. We take calls Tuesdays through Thursdays, and we have time slots available. So open the link to check for openings. Also, you can submit questions to Spark Fund at firelightmedia.org. We check that email box. We're humans. A human being. We check that email box daily. So we will answer your questions there as well. And next slide. And again, I want to thank all our co-presenting partner organizations This slide has their URL links, which will be included in the PDF. For those of you who registered for this webinar, you will receive a copy of that PDF. So thank you to all the organizations seen here, as we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. And next slide.
That's the end of the
Or am I
slides.
done?
Mhm.
We did have 2 questions come through if you want to review those quickly.
Okay.
The first one is, do we know if this will be recurring funds?
No, not at this point. But as Marcia mentioned before, we hope that this will be the start of something exciting for documentary filmmakers.
And the final question is, what percentage of the evaluators are filmmakers / doc industry folks, and what percentage are humanities scholars?
That is still to be determined because it's probably based on availability, but yes, we're definitely sending out invitations to persons in those fields.
That was the final question I had.
Okay, so thank you all for joining us for this webinar. I want to thank our interpreters for today, Gloria and Pati. Also, our closed caption interpreter, I think that's Amy. Thank you, Antonia. Thank you, Felicia, Patty, Justin, Marcia, and everyone, all our partners, and to all of you who attended today. As I said, just apply. And we look forward and thank you for all your questions and have a great week.